We meet in an hour of change and challenge, in a decade of hope and fear, in an age of both knowledge and ignorance. If this capsule history of our progress teaches us anything, it is that man in his quest for knowledge and progress is determined and cannot be deterred. Because that goal will serve to organize and measure the best of our energies and skills. Because that challenge is one that we're willing to accept, one we are unwilling to postpone, and one we intend to win.
Welcome to another episode of the Energy Impact Podcast. Our guest today is Mike Lin, the general partner of Dangerous Ventures. Mike, great to have you on.
Hey, thank you so much.
So excited to hear about Dangerous Ventures and everything involved with that. But before we go there, tell us about yourself. Where are you from?
Oh yeah, well, let's see, I'm a child of immigrants from Taiwan and China. Before that, they were refugees finding their way to the island nation of Taiwan, and then making their way eventually to the United States, where I was born. And I grew up in a small suburb in northern New Jersey, not too far from Murray Hill, where there's Bell Labs. And so if you're not familiar with it, this is where the transistor was invented, the laser, the first photovoltaic solar cell, all sorts of great things came out of that kind of think and do tank called Bell Labs way back in the day.
And was there a connection as to how your family ended up all the way across the country in New Jersey for Bell Labs, or it just was happenstance that was in your backyard?
Yeah. So my dad was a chemist by background and had gotten his PhD, in the States, which is what brought him there. And then work brought him to that part of New Jersey where he was working on all sorts of interesting, microelectronics and that sort of thing that we find in everything from smartphones to satellites today.
And so is that like your playground? Like some kids had, Play-Doh and toys, and you had circuit boards. And I mean, how much does that like really influence you as you grew up, or did he kind of leave work at work?
Yeah, very much. It was, kind of having a full set of tools in the basement and garage. And, when the VCR stopped working, my dad encouraged, us to sit down together and, take it apart and peek inside and see, what made this thing work and could we fix it? And shortly after graduating high school, I had a fantastic summer internship working at Bell Labs, where it was, kind of being alongside Nobel Prize, winning researchers and, being an 18, 19-year-old, recent high school grad. It was just kind of a mind-blowing experience being able to do some, fundamental science and research. And that really, kind of got the gears turning in terms of, well, what might I be able to do, with my work and career.
Fascinating. Do you feel like you could appreciate that content? Like, did the magnitude of that work really sink in at the time, or is it more kind of looking back, you're like, holy cow, I was on the lab bench next to this guy, like, but you're some 18-year-old, right? Like sometimes it doesn't feel as serious, I guess, at that age.
Yeah, I very much took it for granted that classmates in this modest suburban town with taking classes with friends and neighbors, that so and so won the Nobel Prize in physics, and so is this incredible researcher that invented X. And so yeah, it was a huge privilege to grow up with friends, colleagues, family members that were in the mix, and yet all very humble and modest and grounded, and just doing really important and kind of necessary work.
Yeah, awesome. That's fascinating. Okay, so you had this internship experience. You kind of grew up around people with the knack, fiddlers and right, and sort of solving problems. So yeah, did you go into engineering? What was the path then into college and ultimately career?
Yeah, I was always interested in tinkering and building, model rockets and airplanes, and in the sketch pad, drawing, and very much appreciated art, and had this incredible opportunity where I applied and got into Stanford, and didn't know much about it. You know, my parents being immigrants, just didn't know how to navigate the U.S. college system, and so my high school college counselor, I'd asked, "Hey, I'm thinking about this place, Stanford, I'd heard about," and they said, "Oh yeah, that's a great school in Connecticut." And they didn't quite put two to two together that, oh, there's this other place, halfway around the world. But yeah, there's a program there. Used to be called product design, and now it's just design. And so this is kind of the nexus of design thinking and user-centered design, and this methodology of kind of an inquiry-based, um, kind of need finding and user-led kind of approach to figuring out, well, how do I bring new solutions into the world? And they could be physical products, but now increasingly more, digital products and services, UI, UX, that sort of thing. And so it was a great, kind of blending together of my interests of, both art, kind of and science and engineering together.
And that's interesting. Can I ask which came first? Because I've now met a number of folks that come out of sort of the Stanford, what I'll call school of thought around business, right? Which is that demand pull framework that you just described. And I think it's quite unique to have people that come up from an engineer design, right? They're about the widget to then transition to be about the problem, right? And so, which came first? Did you identify that you needed to be about the problem and that that program was what would get you there? Or was that part of that experience and that education through Stanford that took your sort of technical background and married it with that business demand pull sense?
Yeah, I certainly did not have any kind of foresight into, oh gosh, you got to be, kind of need driven and have pull. It was rather, I have all these interests, and if you've ever met, young children, um, they're they're creative. They're just doing, and just exploring. And so I think, as a child, as an adolescent, I was curious, but didn't know what I didn't know. And so I was very fortunate to find myself in that environment. I was drawn by the allure of, California and palm trees, but was very fortunate, delighted to find myself in this community of folks who, um, didn't just have an engineering mindset. Oh, I gotta build something, better or more complex, or just solving problems for problem's sake. It was very much, well, there's a whole host of problems out there in the world, and they deserve solving. Find what you're interested in, what your passion is, and then go pursue that. And far be it for you to design in a vacuum. You don't want to go out there, toil away in the lab just to pitch it over the fence and say, "Hey, I made this thing." Maybe you would want to prototype something. It might be a very crude, rapid prototype. It doesn't have to look great. It could be, foam core and rubber bands and hot glue and just piecing whatever together, putting it in front of people, and then getting their input and feedback. And it's this, rapid prototyping process, an iterative express test cycle kind of design process that gets you very rapidly and incrementally closer to the solution. And hopefully you're, as they say, fail fast, fail forward. And we'll add, hopefully you could fail inexpensively and make new mistakes, not kind of old ones. And so in that way, getting yourself closer and closer to whatever your goal might be.
Yeah, fascinating. Okay, well, so which problems did you then seek to solve first? So you had this framework, you had this education. What then?
Yeah. Yeah. So I was always very much interested, in the environment and kind of society at large. And so this came from, yeah, just a wonderful supportive family and community and upbringing where, I was in the Cub Scouts and Boy Scouts when I was little, and hiking the Appalachian Trail growing up on the East Coast, and gaining an appreciation for nature that way. And I had, wonderful high school and middle school science teachers. So I remember doing, a fifth grade science project on renewable energy and building a passive solar house, out of cardboard and that sort of thing. And so it was always an area of interest. But curiously enough, at Stanford at the time, I went to university in 1999, right as the dot-com bubble was forming, and graduated in '03. And so a lot of the energy and a lot of froth was around, the dot-com, but I was almost, totally unaware of it. I was in my own little bubble, and all of this stuff was happening around me while I was focused on, kind of energy in the environment.
Well, so yeah. I mean, that was a very nascent industry at that time, right? I mean, there's maybe a little bit of solar happening, probably not that much, really not that much wind.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, where did we set? Maybe still a little bit of peak oil fears, right?
Definitely.
Yeah, I mean, how tell us a little bit, I guess, how that industry evolved. Like take us through the specific path that you took, but give some context to sort of what that actually meant in the broader sense of the
Mhm.
market. That you're sort of blazing your own trail in more ways than one, I think.
Yeah, yeah. I think there was a lot of early activity happening, at Stanford at the time, and in ways, one of my heroes and mentors, a Professor Gil Masters, was an electrical engineer by background and launched the course, I think in 1973, so quite literally about 50 years ago, that I think was called Alternative Lifestyles. And it was about energy efficient, building design. And it was this hippy dippy class that has since been, renamed, basically green building and energy efficiency, energy efficient building design. But, he was the vanguard. He was at the forefront of being up there on rooftops, installing photovoltaics at the time in the, late 60s, early 70s, and drilling through people's roofs. And then he would get a phone call, when the winter came around, and be like, "Hey, what's going on?" And realized, yeah, that there's this whole host of kind of new engineers, designers, entrepreneurs that he could train as an instructor and maybe leave the general contractor work to somebody else, to the roofers. And yeah, that got me down this path of, well, might I actually design my own curriculum, my own coursework, because I had enrolled as a Stanford mechanical engineer, and that was more traditional, looking at you know thermodynamics and fluid mechanics and that sort of thing, and it didn't really ever really touch upon these applications of sustainability. So that's kind of how that found that design program that was a bit more human centered and kind of more integrative, you could say. And so it was taking a combination of courses in um, like different departments, civil and environmental engineering, in ethics and society. I took a gap year between undergrad and grad school and ended up at Yale, where I took courses in gender studies and forestry, energy systems, where I studied under Arnulf Grubler. Um, and that brought me to a nuclear power plant and the long wall coal mine, and went down the mine shaft and then to a GE wind turbine factory. And so it's kind of choose your own adventure, but putting together an academic experience that only in hindsight does it really make sense. But at the time, again, it was kind of curiosity and kind of inquiry based and kind of just just kind of following my nose to where I thought, my interests might kind of kind of align.
I have to tease you. I'm not sure you understand what a gap year theoretically means. You took a year off to go study at an equally prestigious and challenging university. No, that's
Yeah.
fascinating. Um, well, yeah, okay. So you had this like very unique experience. I think you also dropped casually that then you went to graduate school. So was that it was presumably building on this curriculum focused around teaching, or what would you have some particular goal in mind when it came to graduate school?
Certainly not. I think graduate school is in a way to delay, for me at least, God, what
I
comes
wasn't
next?
I couldn't say it. You had to say that. I couldn't volunteer that.
Yeah, yeah. I think, like, very humbly, I had no idea what I was doing, and was in the middle of like a quarter life crisis, as I'm sure a lot of folks, especially Gen Z, today. Um, and so I had the great fortune of being able to go back to Stanford and do a master's, continuing to study mechanical engineering. And I thought, perhaps design for manufacturability and how we make stuff might be an area of kind of academic pursuit. Um, I didn't, exactly know what I wanted to do, but this could be, just again, putting one foot in front of the next, and all of these things uh, directionally correct might give me some more perspective, build some skills that I might be able to apply in the future. And so I ended up working in the product realization lab as a grad student, as a teaching assistant, which is the student machine shop that's been around for decades. And there, it's a real hands-on and again experiential kind of lab where students from any department can get in there and learn how to use a mill or a lathe and do welding and CNC machining. There's a great prototyping facility with 3D printers and laser cutters, and so that was a great, yeah, kind of way to be immersed in this really creative and hands-on environment where people are doing really kind of interesting things. And I vividly remember the day when JB Straubel rolls up into the courtyard of the PRL, the Product Realization Lab, with this bright red, Porsche 944 that he had modified. And of course, JB went on to co-found and be the CTO of Tesla. And so, as you said, it was still early days in kind of the clean tech movement, but there was that, incredible vibrant energy and the DNA. Like there was just incredible people in the mix, all doing really interesting things. And as I'm finding out now, have been for decades, really, led by Gil Masters, who's now gone to teach, quite literally thousands and thousands of students who are now at the Department of Energy and U.S. Green Buildings Council, and name this or that other, utility or, public-private partnership, developer. Like he's kind of really helped create many generations now of change makers.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I mean, what was do you have like a favorite prototype or thing that you saw get built, even if it wasn't ultimately successful? Is there like anything in particular that like sticks in your mind? Like what's the party story that you tell about your time there in the lab? I imagine you just saw so many cool things, right?
Oh
Um,
man, yeah. I mean, tons of
weird.
really interesting things, and the wild thing is that, like, maybe this is uh, said a bit too often, but Silicon Valley and kind of California broadly, but certainly Stanford embraces failure. And so, the number of failed prototypes well outnumbers the successes. But even I had built like an electric skateboard back in the day, and this is when batteries are nowhere near as wonderful as they are today. They're not as energy dense or safe. And so I had built a big clunky electric skateboard, having hacked apart an old electric scooter, and stolen parts from electric um, wheelchairs and that sort of thing. But the thing must have weighed like 50 pounds because it was basically lugging around a huge lead acid battery, and it could go for at most, maybe, a mile or two. And so, certainly a failure by all accounts, but wonderful to see all these great electric mobility solutions that now exist.
Yeah, that's funny. So, I mean, a failure-ish, but you were able to ride it. I mean, that's
Yeah.
Frankenstein 50-pound skateboard. You probably weren't
Yep.
able to carry it very many places, but
Exactly. Yeah.
that's awesome. Okay, well, so from that experience, what next?
Yeah. So uh, that last year in grad school, I was able to land a dream job. So I was actually able to finish a lot of coursework early and continue to, experiment in the lab. But also, I landed this job at Apple, working in their environmental technologies group, and it was a small team, and I was tasked as a 24, 25-year-old with coming up with Apple's climate change strategy, believe it or not. And so I just was like totally over the moon. This was like, you know, could not have imagined a better place for me to land. And so I thought to myself, gosh, who am I to, craft on my own this strategy? I'm surrounded by, the brightest minds, these Nobel laureates, um, who ultimately, ended up actually winning the Nobel Prize with the IPCC, and along with Al Gore. And at that time, I guess it was 2005, 2006, Al Gore was on the speaking circuit giving his Inconvenient Truth, keynote presentation as just a lecture before it became a film. And so he had packed an auditorium at Stanford, and I had the privilege of attending. And I thought, well, of course, I've got to reach out to Al Gore. Who better else to help advise than this prominent figure? And of course, he's using the Mac laptop, all throughout the presentation. And so I send out this email, and I get a response back from his chief of staff. We get the ball rolling. There's a lot of excitement. And so again, this is while I'm still a student. A couple days later, there's graduation. I get my newly minted diploma. I'm excited to hit the ground running when that Monday morning I get hauled into my boss's office, and he quite literally says, SHIT rolls downhill, and you're at the bottom of that hill. You are fired. And I'm just totally caught off guard. I'm like, what are you talking about? And so I get lectured You went over my head. You went over my boss's head, over my boss's head. Uh, you went over Steve Jobs' head. You went straight to a board member. Al Gore is on the board, and you cannot go over all these people. And so I got let go for circumventing the management and insubordination. And so I learned pretty quickly how the real world works, unfortunately.
Right out of the gate. Yeah, they waited until you were eligible to let you walk right into the trap.
I had no idea what major folly I had committed, but it turned out to be quite literally like the best worst mistake I've ever made. Because after that, I found myself working in the startup realm where there's this notion of uh, you know ask for forgiveness, not for permission, and you really have to take the initiative to get things going. And really, it turned out to be a much better cultural fit than big kind of Fortune 500 culture.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, tell us how did you transition from that? Basically from a standing start the Monday after graduation. How did you progress from there?
Yeah, well, after licking my wounds and really just having another like existential crisis, I'm like, my God, I really screwed up here. It was through the great, kind of community and really the network of people who were very much values aligned, who said, you know what, there's this startup that's just coming together. It's a bunch of folks between MIT and Stanford who formed an organization called Squid Labs. So Saul Griffith, who's a MacArthur Genius, Fellow recipient. He's been working closely with, numerous administrations, from Obama to Biden and so on, and now with the Australian government, you know, formed this think and do tank, working on all sorts of interesting projects, consulting, and also spinning out their own companies. And among them, Makani Power, which is a high altitude wind energy startup that was acquired by Google and folded into Google X. And I joined another startup called Potenko, which was developing small power generation systems that were tied to this one laptop per child initiative, also known as the OLPC. And they were developing $100 laptop, for kids in frontier markets across, Africa, Latin America, elsewhere.
My
And
sister was
so,
in that program. She went to Brazil, maybe somewhere in South America. I can't remember, but she did that
right
for
on.
a summer or something. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, so it was a cute little green laptop that had two little antenna that would pop up, and they had innovated all sorts of amazing things from low energy e-ink displays to wireless mesh networking. And actually, it was in a way to kind of tie it back, to earlier. It was in a way it was an engineered solution that was kind of like a hammer looking for nails. No one ever really said, "Hey, what we need is $100 laptop." With all due respect to the folks at MIT, it's a brilliant piece of technology. But what they missed the mark on was, did they really engage with, the stakeholders and the communities, like the children and their families, the teachers, that like, hey, is this the thing that y'all need? And as it turns out, when I was traveling, overseas, uh, we found that, incredibly, maybe it's not actually the thing that people need. And instead, everywhere we went in the most far-flung villages, people had cell phones. They had these little, 10, 20, $30 Nokia candy bar phones that were ubiquitous all around the world, but eventually they would get, a little banged up and they would find their way, secondhand to Africa. And these entrepreneurs, small, corner store owners and fishermen, farmers, teachers and doctors and nurses, like they were all adopting cell phones because it enabled them to, of course, communicate. No surprise there. But in a way, it enabled them to leapfrog the wired telephone grid. And so, when before you had to put down a pole every so many feet and string up all these wires, of course, really capital intensive. And in, low income countries, they just couldn't do and build out that infrastructure in the same way. So it wasn't for lack of wanting, communications or even the ability to pay. It was just the infrastructure just wasn't there for them to have a phone, quite literally go to every home.
Yeah.
And so wireless enabled them to totally leapfrog straight, through that whole wired telephone system. And that actually led to the ability to think a little bit more creatively about energy access. And so after working at Makani and building a team out, we were able to launch a company called Phoenix in partnership with Google. who was at the time developing the Android phone. So before it was available in the US, their engineers were actually piloting and prototyping, working very closely with farmers and maternal health workers, nurses, to explore, well, how might, you know, the Android phone help, lift up these communities out of poverty through giving them access to information, helping them generate more income for themselves and all this good stuff.
Wow. Yeah. Super cool. Um, so, okay. So yeah, so that, you sort of did fall back into tech a little bit, right? So bring us full circle then back to energy. How did you parlay that into sort of the next stage?
Yeah, so the business model that kind of emerged was actually, in conjunction with Google, and there are these massive billion-dollar, telecoms that were actually building out the infrastructure. It arose that this need existed to actually keep the phones charged. So if you think, well, God, if there's no wired telephone service, there certainly is no power going to these villages. And so how are they actually charging these phones right now?
Mm.
And so it was actually leaning on this design thinking, methodology that I'd been trained in at Stanford that led us to um, conduct this kind of need finding process, user observation, meet with folks in the village, talk to these executives at Vodafone and Orange, MTN, the big South African telecom, to realize that, wow, you know what? There's this massive need that's not being met. And it's not because of a lack of network now. It's actually for lack of power. They were actually power constrained. And as we ran these pilots and studies, we came to realize, you know what? It takes two to tango. You need to have both phones, not surprisingly, charged and online in order to make or receive a call, send a text, even send, mobile money transfer. And so they were leaving a lot of money on the table by not having their customers' phones on and online. And so we found that you could actually enable these telecoms to make anywhere from 10 to 14% more revenue per user per month, like month over month, if they just provided access to power. And so the premise for Phoenix was actually developing, in a way, a micro, smart uh, power system. So think of it as like a miniaturized Tesla Powerwall, where it could charge from, solar, but actually quite literally anything. You could plug it into a little pedal power bicycle generator. We developed a little micro wind turbine, a water wheel. You could plug it into the grid or even into a diesel or gas generator. But the idea was to safely and efficiently, affordably store that power and store that energy, and then deliver, that power to anybody for, quite literally anything. But we actually designed it first and foremost for cell phone charging. So little USB ports, little, cigarette lighter adapter, car charger ports. And so we bundled these things and actually sold it through the cell phone retail shops.
Mm.
Because we realized, a real hard thing to get done is that last mile distribution. How are you going to reach these far-flung places? And so there were lots of well-intended, nonprofits, NGOs, and even for-profit startups that were trying to serve these communities, but they were never able to crack that nut of, distribution, firstly. But then we also realized, trust was another major aspect. Like, who are we, being foreigners, parachuting in to convince anybody to spend their hard-earned money on something like this? And there was also a lot of mistrust because there's a lot of dumping of really cheap, junky solar panels, LED lights, and that sort of thing at the time. And this is now fast forward to like 2008, 2009. And so, yeah, it was in partnership with these big telecoms. We actually co-branded our systems with their logo. We sold it in their shops, and eventually actually even offered microfinance through their cell phone payment systems.
Mm.
So it became such that you could actually, text us 20 cents a day. We would send you back a code, and that would unlock the system. And so it became really we were one of the first pay-as-you-go power companies that are now emerging throughout these markets. And so we're now, I think, in 9 countries across Africa. We were acquired by Engie, the big French multinational power company, and I think powering somewhere on the order of like 9, almost 10 million people now.
Wow. Yeah. So what's that in megawatts for 9 to 10 million people in that part of the world?
Oh God, yeah. So it was something on the order of 15 watts per panel. And the great brilliant part was also that you continue to build and grow that system as your income, might improve. And so something on the order of like 15 megawatts or so, initially for that first million, and then now, keep adding zeros to that.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it's that the acquisition went through in 2018, and yeah, they continue to roll up additional startups. And they're expanding into new markets, everything from very small systems to ours, which were kind of in the middle, to micro and mini grids now.
Wow,
So yeah, it's
cool.
a great kind of a story coming full circle, but really one about business model innovation. How could you actually align the incentives for all these big players who have the balance sheet to take something like this out there, and really with the distribution, with the after sales service and support as well, being able to dial a toll free call center and get somebody who speaks your local language and all these various local dialects. Like it was a lot of uh, kind of thinking that went into how do you build a lasting, durable, trusted, kind of product and ultimately a company and system all around it.
Yeah. No, that yeah, it's almost always about the business model, right, as opposed to some brand new shiny tech. Yeah, that's really cool. Are you still involved in the business, or was it more of a clean exit?
Yeah, it was
And
a
yeah,
clean exit.
yeah.
They acquired 100% of it in an all cash deal, and it was a real fantastic, exit for the industry as a whole as well. There's been a lot of amazing activity, a lot of great entrepreneurs, a lot of great companies formed, and still it's early days though. Quite literally hundreds of millions, billions of dollars have been invested in energy access. And the challenge is, how do you actually demonstrate to investors that this is an investable, market and segment? And it very much is. There's a fortune to be made at the base of the pyramid. And how are
Mhm.
these next, billion plus going to come online? I think still, 800 million or so people still don't have access to reliable power, and so that's a massive opportunity in market. And hopefully more and more, entrepreneurial activity will continue to happen, and exits also showing that yeah, it's an investable space.
Yeah, amazing. And I guess that brings us to what you're building now, then, right? If I'm making that leap, so correct me if that's not the case. Tell
Yeah.
us a bit about Dangerous Ventures and how that idea came about and what your niche is.
Yeah, totally. So, with the fortune and benefit of that exit, I was able to do some angel investing myself. And in the course of doing so, connected with my business partner, Ward Hendon, where we were, very much aligned from a values perspective, wanting to, use venture and really saw entrepreneurial kind of activities as a way for both doing well and doing good. That you don't have to be like a Andrew Carnegie, or with steel, or the Rockefellers with oil, like do all this great work but also create a lot of harm, and then donate and do philanthropy on the back end. We felt that yeah, you could actually make a positive impact while also, of course, making kind of making a decent return. And so this thesis began to emerge early 2020, and connected up with our third general partner, Gabby Derbyshire. And so all three of us are entrepreneurs. We've all built businesses and had great, exits, and each in a slightly different sector. Gabby was a media entrepreneur and had co-founded Gawker Media. And previous to that, I worked in all sorts of other startup environments, from wine to also, kind of management consulting. Ward had co-founded a company called Axiom Law that really innovated in the legal tech space in a way, enabling greater flexibility and work-life balance. In a way, it was almost the Uber for law. It was a gig economy kind of setup where you didn't have to work through the kind of legal grind as an associate, toiling in the mines in hopes of eventually making partner one day. That kind of pyramid scheme is terribly, kind of grueling and unfair. And so the premise was, let people do their best work in a way that's, flexible and plays to their strengths. And they built that to a massive business, and then had a private equity exit a number of years ago. And so we're all operators first and foremost, and see venture investing now as a way of us, in a way, working with this next generation of entrepreneurs. And we get to live kind of vicariously through them.
Yeah, talk a little bit about that transition from operator to investor. The axiom is what an investor always wants to be an operator always wants to be an investor. Um, So yeah, tell us about how that mind shift, or if it has, how you've had to sort of change your approach. And um, I think when you're an entrepreneur, there needs to be some like perennial well of optimism, and when you're an investor, there needs to be like a healthy level. Right? You need some balance of skepticism and optimism. But yeah, talk to us a little bit about how that shift is going for you.
Yeah, it's absolutely delightful. Like I can't imagine a better path for myself and also for Ward and Gabby, where yeah, we realize that there's this unique set of skills that you acquire as an entrepreneur. And in a way, many people then apply that to their next venture and then their next venture and their next venture, that you get to be a serial entrepreneur. But I think the incredible opportunity to be an investor has enabled us to, in a way, be parallel entrepreneurs. We can kind of drop in to critical stages within the company, express that we know what we know and we also know what we don't know, and hopefully we can you know uh, enable more so than anything uh, the entrepreneurs that we work with, that we've backed, to see around corners, to have this superpower of sorts, because you get the collective benefit of all these other people, and not just us, but of course all their other investors, uh, that it enables them to hopefully ask the right questions and triangulate to the right answer. Because far be it for us to tell them what to do. In fact, if we did know, we would probably be out there building that company. But we know that they're, talented, that they've got that drive, they have that, skill, whatever it might be, or that insight that led them to found that company. So we're here to enable them, to do their best work. And I think that in a way is our view on like what is that role of the investor, which might differ from firm to firm, but we really see ourselves as, kind of enabling and empowering them to do their best work. And the best we can do is help them, again, ask the right questions, or point out areas that they might not have seen or considered, not because for any particular reason other than they don't have that same experience or perspective that we might have. And that's where we really do, again, value coming from these three different, quite seemingly disparate sectors. But what we have in common was actually kind of disrupting and transforming really deeply entrenched industries of media, legal, and say energy, and doing so in a way that move that whole system in a new direction for everybody's benefit. And we were able to do so by identifying like pretty key and strategic leverage points, to kind of to operate, and again align incentives for everyone along the way to get things to move in that direction.
Yeah, cool. And are those the three verticals then that you're sort of targeting for your origination efforts, or is it a broader or more narrow thesis for the fund?
Yeah, so the fund is called Dangerous, and it gets its name from a variety of ways. But we love this Banksy quote, the street artist, that says, "There's nothing more dangerous than a person who wants to make the world a better place." And we recognize at the same time that the world is an increasingly dangerous place out there. There's a lot of pressing problems to be solved. And so the thesis, for Dangerous is that we're primarily investing in companies that are helping build for a more resilient future for both people and planet. And so in a way, we are, quite fond of supply side solutions. We've invested in a company called Overview Energy that's building really novel space-based power generation, where they're generating electricity in space, they're safely wirelessly beaming it back to Earth. And I can't tell you more than that at the moment because they're still very much in stealth mode. But the primary focus of the fund is actually looking at the demand side, that we see there being, you know, a really interesting business there in Overview Energy, and it was a wild and really bold, audacious kind of kind of endeavor. So we wanted to back that, but it also comes down to having immediately implementable, very practical solutions that can immediately have an impact in terms of gigatons carbon savings. So we've invested in a company called PowerX. That's a Y Combinator kind of company that's looking at the demand side management, particularly most recently looking at businesses and how with smart sensors and predictive algorithms they can really identify immediate energy and therefore cost savings and carbon savings for large businesses. And that builds for greater resilience by just reducing the need for as much power generation, but also looking at other sectors, be it food or water, mobility. But again, this kind of plays into, in a way, our strengths of how do you transform these complex systems, and also from my design thinking background in terms of that user-centered design. What are the users in need of? What helps for them to get, more for their penny, for their dollar, as well as creating for better quality of life. So that idea of kind of hot showers and cold beers without any kind of any negative impact on them.
Yeah. Well, I mean, those are two from a like a level of audaciousness. Those are two like wild ends of the spectrum, right? There's a whole host of like advanced side management is not a well-trodden path, but that's an industry that's evolved over 10, 15 years now at various levels and scales. And so like literally interstellar energy beamed back to Earth wirelessly sounds absolutely crazy and super cool to kind of dig your hands into. Do you have and I guess you have some technical, I mean, do you feel like you're maybe set apart a little bit in your ability to do technical diligence for some of these more forward-thinking ideas? Like, is that sort of a value add that you articulate to limited partners?
Yeah, so I have the benefit of this technical background. Ward and Gabby are actually both attorneys by background, though Gabby was also trained as a scientist at Cambridge, before that. And so we have this, kind of foundation, but we certainly build upon that through our advisors. So we're actually very fortunate to have Amory Lovins from the Rocky Mountain Institute and also Joel Swisher, both of whom are faculty at Stanford and are really kind of preeminent engineers, designers, thought leaders, especially on the energy efficiency and demand side. And so we're very fortunate to leverage them as well as other advisors who have deep expertise in hardware and software both to be able to diligence some of these more technical solutions. But also a lot of these are business model questions. So being able to tap our community of folks who understand let's say agriculture or the water system. And so we've invested in a company called Verity Ag out of Vancouver, Canada. And so they have this really an approach to plant level healthcare and precision irrigation. The notion that by using satellite imagery and remote sensing data, developing this bit of hardware. So you do need to touch some atoms in the world as much as you do need to have bits. And so this combination of bits and atoms to basically use irrigation, use water much more intelligently, and that actually has the benefit not only of just saving water, but actually boosting yield and even improving the quality of their product. And so I think one example they have is working with wine growers, grape kind of winemakers. When growing grapes, they can actually make that wine a whole lot better because they can really attune it for you're not left to the whims of weather, but rather you can get that perfect kind of condition in the soil and the water and all that to hopefully bring out all the qualities that you want to see in wine. So I think their example is they took effectively grapes that would go into a $12 bottle of wine and make it a $30 bottle, and all the while using 10% less water and fertilizer. And actually they got the harvest to align so that you didn't have to go through and pick the grapes twice. You could just harvest all the grapes because they're all maturing and ripening at the same rate and get them all harvested once. So driving up their profitability and all that. So really intelligent, again, alignment of incentives. And so there's this amazing kind of customer pull from these growers, be it orchards or vineyards or that sort of thing.
Yeah, really cool. All I could think of as you were describing that is that the sommeliers that have to remember which vineyard is what is going to throw off the whole system of wine recognition.
Hopefully it means it's better wine for everyone.
Sure.
And they're taking this kind of Tesla Roadster approach. They're going to start at these high value crops where they can really show the quality, but also they're working with Driscoll's, the strawberry blueberry kind of company. And how do you build for in a way more resilience in the food system as we're increasingly impacted by climate? So we want to use that precious resource of water very judiciously and as effectively as possible. And so they're working both outdoors, but now increasingly indoors as well, with their smart irrigation valve and control systems.
Yeah, fascinating. No, that's really cool. Yeah, well, I probably asked too many questions and got into too much detail, but what a path. Yeah, what are you most excited about sort of projecting forward either in the existing deal pipeline or 5 years from today? What's the irrigation, the smart irrigation equivalent that we're talking about at that time? What are you seeing around the corner?
Oh man, I think yeah, I know there's a lot of um, you know, activity in basically every sector right now. And I'm actually super enthusiastic. Uh, the the current macro environment is definitely very, very volatile, very scary. And I can only imagine, newly minted grads are terrified right now, but there's no better time, I think, to be graduating because there's just so much more opportunity now than there was even a few years ago. Um, and so, I finished my undergrad in '03, and that was kind of the dot-com bubble bursting. And then I finished my master's degree right around like kind of the great financial crisis. And so I, in a way, see this, kind of recession of sorts that we're in right now as being this like Cambrian explosion of all sorts of new products and companies, all sorts of new services that are going to just blow our minds in ways that we can't even predict. And layer on top now, of course, generative AI and large language models and all that. Like, gosh, we can even do more faster, better, with less. And I think that that's hard for me to predict. So I won't dare say we're going to have X, but I think that we'll be able to, yeah, be far more resource efficient, certainly, and name your resource. I think we can do that much more efficiently, and that just reduces the amount of supply side we need to put online, and hopefully also mean that we can retire a lot of the dirtiest kind of power sources that we have presently. Um, the other thing that really inspires me right now, kind of tying into the kind of the next generation of entrepreneurs is teaching, and so I've actually just started teaching at Stanford again. So with this new Doerr School of Sustainability, backed by John Doerr, we have just all this exciting opportunity to really get the next generation of entrepreneurs who and scientists, researchers, policymakers, kind of equipped with the knowledge and background, hopefully the experience that they need in order to get the job done. There's no time like today, and that was something that I didn't have as a student there. I had to cobble it together, but now with this concerted effort, I think it's just going to really accelerate and magnify things, to kind of operate at speed and scale, as Dora likes to say.
Yeah, fascinating. Yeah, I love how optimistic that perception. I was gonna like, are you graduating from something else that we don't know about that you just happen to hit every single sort of major financial crisis over the last 30 years? Um, but yeah, you're so right that those end up being the crucibles for the next stage of growth, right? And it's just, are you standing at the top of the hill looking down, or are you standing at the bottom of the hill looking up? Is just a matter of perception.
Totally. Yeah. Yeah. And I think that there's more talent now than ever, especially, I mean, I'm delighted in a way by, um, this kind of constrained environment that we're in, kind of a ZIRP, kind of zero interest rate environment created so many market distortions.
Yeah,
And as a result, lots of companies were getting funded that arguably shouldn't have. Lots of big tech companies, for better or for worse, were just gobbling up talent to, secure them and keeping them away from the competition. And that meant a lot of new entrepreneurial kind of ventures didn't get started because those folks, were on the sidelines. And so, yeah, this hope is, um, these teams are going to be able to do so much in the coming, months and hopefully, near-term years, uh, to move the needle in the direction that we need to in order to resolve the climate crisis.
awesome. Awesome. All right. Well, what have we not talked about that we should have?
Man, I would like to pose a question to you since
Yeah.
you have so many, amazing guests. I'm wondering, you know, if if you had a magic wand that you can materialize out of thin air anything, um, what might that be? Because yeah, you've seen so much over the course of this podcast, and I've really enjoyed listening, in the audience. Um, but yeah, if you could synthesize and give me marching, orders, uh, if I can use that, kind of again the privilege that I am so fortunate to have and the access that I have, my goal in life is to really use all that I've been gifted to further things. And so, what might that be?
Oof. Well, you win the prize for the hardest question I've ever been asked on a podcast thus far. So maybe I should be more careful bringing on educators and teachers. I, I'm gonna. This is kind of a cop out, but it's a sideways answer to your question. I think there's a lot of attention on sort of climate and reducing carbon footprint and energy efficiency, and even a lot of our conversation today, right, on reducing consumption. And I think that's super important. But I think in the real world, my observation, and again, my perspective, is that that actually results in more utilization of that product or service. And I wish we sort of tackled, and actually coming back to Phoenix, right? You're tackling energy scarcity just as much, if not more, than this question of sort of climate change. And so to me, it's those parallel, that needs to be a larger part of the conversation, because otherwise it's really, it's sort of a marginal, energy efficiency is sort of a percept or from a position of relative privilege and marginal benefit, right? That it maybe nominally changes the rate of change of climate change. Whereas I think if we looked at it holistically from a global scale and said we need to bring all of these, we need to get energy access to all of these people for all sorts of reasons, right? Communication being one, but healthcare, food, quality of life. How would that change the dialogue of how we go about solving these problems? And I think it's just such a massive thing to think about. Like, no single group of humans can like actually think about something at that scale, right? So it's hard to have that dialogue, and it doesn't make for very catchy like political quips. But I think that's a theme that I see and I like to debate with guests is like, yeah, like, how do we decarbonize in a way that accelerates access globally?
I love that. Yeah, and ensure that justice, equity, inclusion is a part of that. That we have these just and equitable transitions, occurring. That it's not just Tesla Roadsters. That it is hopefully that sub $20,000, model, whatever it might be in the future. And yeah, I'm delighted, to have this opportunity to teach at Stanford and get to work now with Amory Levins, Joel Swisher, that I mentioned, but also Jane Woodward, who's an incredible educator who's been teaching at Stanford for, I think, yeah, well over 30 plus years, um, alongside with, yeah, Gil Masters and others who, Jane is now, really influenced me and helped me better understand, well, how can we build for a more kind of abundant future, that it's not about, scarcity, and it's this mindset, and how do we shift it from like a Jimmy Carter era of like got to put on a sweater to again, I think I stole from Amory Levins, yeah, hot showers and cold beers, and getting that done arguably with less, with arguably less, if not no impact, uh, on negative impact on the planet or society. And there's this, I think, approach of even taking design thinking to the next level, instead of user-centered design, just thinking about that human in terms of need finding. How do we think integratively and holistically? Who are all the stakeholders involved? What are all those externalities that we can take into account? Um, and as a result, then not use and abuse and heat, beat, treat, and extract, but rather be additive and again abundant. And so our hope is perhaps at Stanford, develop this an initiative. There's potential for like a flagship destination is something that the university is beginning to articulate, areas that the university wants to prioritize within the School of Sustainability, where we can build into the curricula a systematic way to hopefully teach some of these things so that, again, yeah, the next generation of change makers, be it engineers, entrepreneurs, policymakers, and everything in between, to move the needle in the direction that we want to see and build a future that we want to live in.
Yeah, amazing. What a way to wrap it up, Mike. Thanks so much for coming on, and what a conversation. Can't wait to see all the companies you build.
Oh, thank you so much, Michael. Looking forward to sharing with you sometime soon.
Our leadership in science and industry, our hopes for peace and security, our obligations to ourselves as well as others, all require us to make this effort, to solve these mysteries, to solve them for the good of all men and for the progress of all people.